Good morning. It's Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. Who actually even knows anymore on day 3,465 of lockdown? That joke is getting very old, but these conversations certainly are not. I'm Arya Kelman, and this is a special Red Zone Financial Mail digitized event. We do these once a month on the first Tuesday of every single month, but it's never been this competitive before. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about collaboration, but what happens when you need to collaborate with your arch nemesis, with the Stefano Di Mera of competitors? How do you navigate that kind of curveball? So good morning. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube right now. Plus, you can give us your comments if you're watching on the Arena Events website. And this morning, it's in the one corner, we have this brand. In the other corner, we have this brand. We're going to ring a bell, and then everybody's going to not get to boxing this morning, but rather speaking about how they all came together during the first 5 weeks of lockdown. This morning, we're talking about how the fast food industry came together to feed parts of South Africa. And we're not talking about the fast food guy around the corner. We're talking about three of the biggest chains in South Africa working together and the strategy behind that. So as we know, during lockdown, South African fast food chains were shut down for 5 weeks with no access to income. However, some of them decided to put aside their competitive minds and work together with the Joint Aid Management JAM Foundation to help feed hungry South Africans. These three incredible brands, who all deserve a massive round of applause this morning, are with us this morning. Let's say hello to Marketing Director for KFC South Africa, Suhail Lambada. Let's say with a big smile, hello to Greg Solomon, CEO of McDonald South Africa, and the CMO of Nando South Africa, Doug Place. Plus, to discuss the strategy behind all of this and be the objective voice in the room of these three marketing giants, Zama Hlophe, Strategy Director at Yellowwood. So, I think everyone got really excited when they saw this. Well, excited is a strong term in the context of lockdown week one, because that was very scary. But it brought a smile to everyone's face when they saw three massive brands starting to work together. Obviously, you guys have worked together before, but at different brands earlier on in your career, before you all went into fast food. Some of you have worked together at different organizations before, but this was massive to see KFC, McDonald's, and Nando's coming together. Who asked who out on this date? Who took the initiative?
Okay, cool, fella. Thanks for having me, and what a really flattering intro. I'll certainly remind my boss that I'm so-called a heavyweight. That's normally something that my wife calls me. But I think what this particular program you're referring to was the tip of a far bigger iceberg, which is we were collaborating as businesses, not just as marketing functions, for a long time before we decided to kind of call each other frenemies and come together for something which hopefully does a lot of good. There were a lot of collaborations at a C-suite level around how we work with government in varying stages of the lockdown, such that we can successfully operate our businesses, which has a direct economic impact on the country, preserves as many jobs as possible, but at the same time, respectfully supports a widespread call to operate in a way that's safe for both our staff as well as the public at large. So there were a lot of engagements, probably for at least a month before we decided, look, if we can't trade as we would like to trade, what we can do is to take the foodstuffs that's sitting in our restaurants and cook it and provide food for those who are most vulnerable. We watched, certainly from a Nando's perspective, with great dismay, the news of really long queues at food banks around the country. And what we do for a living is to cook great food and share that with as many people as possible. So it was a very slight deviation for something which we've done for 30 years.
Greg, talk to me about how closely the three of you were working in 2019 and rated a percentage, and talk to me about how closely you've been working together in 2020, just so that we can put a bit of a finite view on how this pandemic really brought you guys together.
I have to be honest with you and say we were probably 10% close in 2019, and we probably 80% close now. It's amazing how this coronavirus has brought us together, but it's really about a common purpose. And as Doug said, I've had the privilege of working with the CEOs, not only of these three brands, of many brands, and also the Consumer Goods Council. We've come together to write almost a manual for this industry. And there's a couple of things that's just amazing for me. You look at it internally, and you're proud of your brand, but then you look at this externally, and you're just immensely proud of this industry. This is a world-class industry with world-class standards. We've got international brands and local brands, and we sort of come together. And I don't even know who the idea came from. It just landed, as what are we going to do in a common purpose? This is what we do every single day. For us, we give to our communities through our franchise organizations every single day. And we just said, can you imagine we just all come together and speak with one voice? I don't think it's anything funny. I mean, just think about Bafana Bafana, Kaizer Chiefs and Pirates. When Chiefs are playing Pirates, it's a big rival game. But when Bafana Bafana is playing, or the Boks are playing, that's what it's all about. And we rallied around this common purpose of needy people, of vulnerable people, of hungry people. We serve food. We serve it in a healthy and a safe way. It was a recipe that was just by osmosis. It just happened.
So Hal, in hindsight, it obviously worked out, and it sounds fantastic, and it seems like it would have been easy. But certainly when you as an organization are faced with, one, the fact that you can't trade, which is your lifeblood, and two, now the ask is actually to work together, surely there's got to be a little bit of ego in that mix there that says, well, I mean, these are two really big things that you're asking me to do here. And how do you kind of overcome the people in the room who have those opinions? Because working together is great in hindsight, but when you're in the moment, the doors are closed, survival mode has to kick in. How do you start, navigating those attitudes of the various stakeholders and decision makers?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, it's crucial that firstly, we're committed to our staff and keeping them safe and engaged. I think it's also critical to work with government authorities to manage health and safety. But I think, it's the sentiment of the time. At that point in time, we knew food security is a major concern. It's a reality for many South Africans. In general, it's a major concern for all of us. So, I remember getting on a call with Greg and Daniel on a Saturday, and then subsequently Doug as well. These were all weekend conversations. And at that point in time, you kind of just want to put the gloves down and say, guys, let's come together. It took a bit of aligning internally. It's not every day that you're speaking on a weekend to your to your competitors. But thankfully we came together, and we wanted to help in any way possible, and thankfully we were able to come together. I mean, for us, we came together around COVID to support South Africans. Feeding the underprivileged is something that KFC has been doing for many years under the ad hoc banner. So it wasn't new to us, but the feeling of the moment, at that point in time, it was just the right thing to do. And like Greg said, it just happened. It doesn't matter who came up with the idea; it just happened, and I'm thankful that it happened.
Well, Zama, there's no strategy textbook that says in the event of a global pandemic, fast food brands should come together and rally support and talk to government and work collaboratively with one another. But certainly when you look at this from a Yellowwood perspective, from a strategy perspective, I mean, this is ticking all the right boxes on how to react in a time of crisis, right?
Absolutely. I think what's really interesting is two primary things. The first is what's been seen as a global move towards industries collaborating together to be able to make sure that they protect the actual industry and that it exists. And the second one is what seems like a very unique dynamic to franchise organizations, because they tend to be quite rooted in communities. And so the sense of responding to what community needs look like tends to be heightened versus almost corporations that don't necessarily have to connect with what the end consumer looks like. And so you find that those businesses typically respond with more than just a CSI vein. They respond with a sustaining the actual the functioning of a community. And so things like these play out much easier because they serve not only the needs of the corporate, but they also serve the needs of the actual business and the business owner, who then has to face people every day when they're normally a source of some form of economic activity.
Greg, let's unpack this idea of protect the industry a little bit more and perhaps start with, well, what is the state? On this, the 7th of July, 2020, halfway through 2020. What is the state of fast food in South Africa amid the global pandemic of coronavirus?
Well, we've classified ourselves slightly differently to restaurants. For many of us, all of us on this group, we've got drive-through and we've got delivery. And if it wasn't for drive-through and delivery, we would be in terrible trouble, I must say. And I've got to talk on behalf of McDonald's here. I can't talk on behalf of the industry. April and May were devastating for the brand. Absolutely devastating. June has been good with our drive-through infrastructure. We're 70% drive-through. So, with that perspective, I certainly believe that this is the safest contactless type service that you can find in the industry, and the customers have responded well to that. For our sit-down dining experience, and for those restaurants out there that don't have drive-through, I mean, the pain continues. However, what COVID's taught us very carefully is that we've got a deep hole to climb out of. June looks a little bit better. Actually, June looks substantially better. But this deep hole of March, April, and May is a big hole to climb out of. And for those brands, what COVID's really done for us, it's basically taken innovation and technology that's going to happen in the next 10 years. It shortened it out, and it said what's going to happen in the next 10 years is going to happen in the next 2 years. And for those brands, I mean, we're talking about big brands on this call that have been already anticipating the digitalization of the world, the fourth industrial revolution, a modern contemporary employment type experience. I think your journey out of this big hole of COVID might be a little shorter, 6 to 12 months. For those businesses that haven't even thought of the journey, the 5-year vision of where this world is going to be in 1 decade, I'm afraid to say it's 24 to 36 months to climb yourself out of this trouble. So in summary, very tough last 3 months. Good June, starting to show some light, big hole to climb out of.
So Hal, take me inside the boardroom on the morning status meetings, which now have, a couple of 2-year-olds running around in the background. And there's that whole implication on sort of the human resource aspect of, endless Zooms. And take me inside what has to happen now between a logistics department in a brand like KFC and a marketing department, because logistics are churning to get stuff done quicker and make it happening. Marketing are thinking, well, how do we communicate this to our followers and our sort of audiences on social media and on TV? How do we create ads about it? And certainly, between logistics and operation and marketing departments in brands like KFC, I mean, the two of you must be joined at the hip at the moment, because there's no time anymore for them to figure something out and then brief it into you. Everything almost has to happen in parallel. And Greg was speaking about it, that, everything is just at such a higher speed. But the bigger the ship is, the harder it is to turn it and to pivot it. So what do you do, and how do you get everyone to move faster and cut through that paperwork quicker?
Yeah, I mean, a few months ago it was business as usual, right? And fast forward a couple of months, and our entire way of working has completely changed. It's if you actually reflect, it's quite incredible to see how quickly we've adapted. And I think this pace of change has forced us to adapt and even potentially replicate what others are doing. I think in terms of the alignment that happens internally, it's often it's not as smooth as it looks. But I think excuse me. But I think what's been critical for us to be is to be nimble. And to also just break down some of the old traditional barriers that we had. And what we found is just communication on the regular is quite critical. I think, WhatsApp, at any point in time, these Zoom calls, team meetings, whatever that is, I think the traditional ways of working have had to be broken down completely. And I think that's what's worked for us quite well. We've adapted or adopted the new world. And, I think from a marketing perspective, from a logistics perspective, from a supply chain perspective, I think, we're finding out that things are, things that we thought were sort of taken for granted are quite critical. So supply chain wise, the origin of goods will become not only important for consumers, but, as an act of conscience, as a big brand, it's critical. So there's so many aspects that we're discovering, and we call it, we're building the plane as we fly. So, I think that's something that we're all adapting to, and so far seems to be working out.
Aria, I just want to, I don't have intimate knowledge of what everyone was going through, but I think one of the most interesting things that you see play out in organizations is when a collaboration is not enforced, but rather voluntary. Which is quite interesting in the case of what the fast food industry did, right? Is the banks were told to work together, and the fast food industry kind of opted in. There was absolutely no expectation to get that done. And I think what you find often is that when the decision is made from inside the organization, there's a greater flexibility in how to make that happen, because there's a personal burden to make sure that being a part of this that we've now opted into, we've got to do our part. And I think you find that often that greases a lot of the restrictions that you would normally find between different functions in a business.
Well, Doug, this starts speaking to the fundamental human truth of fight or flight, right? Do you just, when you have 5 weeks of no revenue, raise your hands and say, cool, we just have to let go of 25% of the people? Obviously, these are 3 brands that have a very strong fighting spirit, which speaks largely to culture. If you have a natural fighting spirit as a brand, whether it's 2017 or 2019, you know that you want to be bigger, you want to be better, you want to be bolder, you want that to be consistent. What do you think it is have been kind of the key ingredients in terms of the culture at Nando's that have really prepared the brand to be able to weather perhaps the biggest storm that it's ever seen? It's never, ever have you had to shut down your stores before. None of you guys. And we're talking hundreds of stores across South Africa, from the little town in Hammanskraal all the way through to the center of Sandton CBD. This is monumental when you start looking at it now. It's crazy to think that these stores were ever closed. It must be nuts. You're sleeping at night knowing that you're going to wake up and tomorrow there's no store. So what are the ingredients in terms of the culture at Nando's? And Greg and Sahel, you can probably pick up on this as well, that you put in over the past few years that have given the teams such resilience in facing the storm?
It's really interesting. Nando's was born in 1987, so has kind of grown up with a young South African democracy. So it's not our first fight by any means. It's not the first time that we faced considerable difficulty. I think it's the first time we faced it so quickly, all at once. And the first thing that Sahel mentioned this as well, was to really look after as many of our people as we possibly could, and that includes franchisees. And that's probably something that's worth discussing. We don't own all our restaurants. Nando's only owns half of them, which means that we have 60, 70 other business owners who operate a Nando's restaurant under a licensing agreement as well. So to be able to look after them, and one of the first things we did was to give a royalty break, which is fundamentally how we make money as a business. So those franchisees could operate and are still operating relatively royalty free until the end of August, which allows them to stay on their feet, which allows them to retain their employee base, which allows them to pay suppliers and to kind of keep the ball moving. I think the hardest part for us was we didn't know at the time it was going to be 5 weeks. It was shut indefinitely. Like most South Africans, it was going to be back to business as usual in April, or just in time for Easter, and then that became May, and then that became June, and even as recently as last week, we were said that we can reopen our restaurants for dine-in. But then there was 3 or 4 weeks until that was actually gazetted to say these are kind of the operating protocols. So there's still a fair degree of uncertainty, all of which creates a financial tsunami. It's devastating. Greg said it. We're incurring millions and millions of rands of losses every single day by making, we're still committed to our employees. So there haven't been salary cuts. We've settled all our supply bills. We've renegotiated with all landlords, and mostly that's been amicable. There's 1 or 2 exceptions to that. And to do that's really expensive. And the position I think we took internally is, if we look back on this in 3 or 4 years' time, and did we do the right thing? There's profit's one thing, but purpose and values, these are far more enduring principles, which are foundational to who Nando's is as a brand. And we wanted to really be true to that in a behavioral sense. It's one thing to have it on your boardroom wall or on a mouse pad or a coffee mug, But it's a different thing when you put people first, and when you put people ahead of considerable profits. That makes for some really difficult decisions, which aren't hard to make, but they are hard to live with.
Well, it's a powerful question that you say around culture, because when times are tough, whether you in a business or whether you're in a family or whether you're in a community, you fall back on culture, and that's what creates nimbleness, as Cyril said. And for us, it is all about culture. And I reckon if you had to go to all 16,000 of our employees and ask them about something of the business, they'll probably tell you something about culture. And one of our culture points is better together. And it didn't even take the first 2 weeks. The head office staff came to me and said to me, Greg, we need to take care of the 16,000 people that probably need the help the most. And we all did a salary sacrifice. And we pulled the money in, and we created these care kits that could feed a family for about 7 to 10 days. And we distributed to all 16,000 of our people, because it starts with them first. And in the most trying time, when profits are the worst, here is a bunch of people living their values. And the second value for us is committed to lead. And they stood up. And then maybe very quickly, you don't want to hog this particular point. For us, it's about independence. It's not about me calling a meeting or running a meeting or chairing a meeting. This is about independence. This business can run without me. And I think these Zoom calls, these Microsoft Team calls, business will never be the same, ever. Head office will never be the same, ever. People have figured out that they need to move on in a different way. And communication is leadership. And what this COVID's done, it's made us communicate better with each other, and it's made us that much more innovative.
So how's culture at KFC, and how kind of prepped everyone for the big storm?
Yeah, I mean, people first, always. I think that's, while we can talk about Zoom and Microsoft Teams, I think that we could all take a break from that. But, I think it's important to differentiate between our office-based staff and in-restaurant staff, as they face very different challenges. I mean, there's not one South African that's been left untouched by the stress of the pandemic, both personally and professionally. I mean, COVID's been tough on everyone. I think the one thing I can say has been a consistent sort of tool or weapon it's a very simple one, is communication. I think staying in touch with people and staying together as a unit. I think Yum prides itself on a people first culture, and that reverberates through the entire organization. So for us, virtual connects, one-on-one, small groups, consistent communication to ensure that everybody knows where the business is at all times. And yeah, I think a lot of measures of the benefits of having a global organization. We had the KFC Care Trust. This was an initiative that provided food parcels, and specifically to our hourly paid employees. The Yum Brands Global Employee Medical Relief Program, a memorial support program. There's a number of initiatives that were drawn out globally, but like I said, I think making sure that the people at the heart of our businesses were looked after, be them working in our restaurants or be them the franchisees themselves. I think consistent communication with them, keeping in touch with them, and making sure that we get through this together was a key priority for us.
Zama, let's talk about the changing consumer. So everyone's spoken a lot about purpose, about consumers being a lot more aware of the supply chain of the products that they buy. Realistically, is the average South African consumer mid-2021 going to really be evaluating their fast food purchase based on initiatives like this, based on having seen the brand collaborate with other brands? Maybe the brand does a campaign around, expressing how it empowers local farmers, how it propelled them during COVID-19. Is there going to be a new consumer that emerges out of this in the category of fast food? Because certainly some brands, will have stronger impacts versus others. But to the person that loves their Happy Meal, that loves the Streetwise 2, that loves the chicken pitta meal with the peri-peri, for that person, is this work that these brands are doing now around purpose going to really be a consideration factor in getting them to buy their products over another brand?
I get you. I think firstly, Aria, your knowledge of all the fast food brand meals is quite intriguing. You rattled those off really well. But I think what we're seeing is that, without a doubt, the idea of a purpose-driven consumer is becoming a default. I think the conversation's been happening for maybe 10 years in marketing, but now the choice is really coming down to it. And different brands have had to respond to it at a different point, right? Each of these brands has had to deal with the sourcing of their food, for example, about 5 to 7 years ago. That was a big thing for both McDonald's and KFC. But I think what you'll probably find, and we're expecting, is a focus much more on how brands have served local audiences and their ability to protect the local industry. And I think that what this move has really placed all three brands in a good position to be able to do is, despite having global presence, the idea of responding to a South African context and serving the needs of the people within this context, I think is probably what's going to stand them in the greatest stead. Because what it does is that it tells the story that despite McDonald's being a US brand, despite Nando's having presence in the UK and KFC being a global brand as well, despite that, the primary focus of the brand here is about the people here. And you find that people are very willing to spend when it feels like it's protecting a local economy rather than feeding an international one. And I think that this move has really helped to deal with some of those things that help people to feel more bonded to a brand. And so the choice of buying it is the choice of supporting myself and the people I care about.
Doug, the new age consumer, what do they look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And your point's well made, and Zama reinforced it, that people are increasingly aware of, the entire story behind the product that they buy. But I will say this, that's still very much it's a minority segment. And that's for those people who have the means and the access to information to be able to critically evaluate their consumption decision, and enough disposable income that allows them to make different choices. So whilst that's a growing audience and one that we're increasingly aware of, I think it's more fundamental than that, in that, as a business, we want to be conscious of operating in a way that is sustainable, that makes us proud, that, makes our employees proud to work for an organization that supports, those who are most vulnerable. And so this particular thing that we're talking about today is a small example of a bigger reality. I think very immediately, and what we've seen just in the last 4 to 6 weeks, is the idea of food safety is more important now than ever. So, being able to, critically evaluate, our menu and the products that we serve to people on a daily basis, they just want to know that it's safe, that it comes from a good place, that it's well prepared, that it's safely prepared and safely delivered. And I think that's going to endure far, way past the pandemic. So things like, cheapness and sort of unconscious purchasing decisions beyond just where the supply chain comes from, which is important, but also, what is this actually doing for me? Is this good for me? What are the consequences behind this decision? And even just trends in health and wellness. Health and wellness 10 years ago used to be a punitive term. Like, going on a diet was something that you do for a short term, as short as you possibly can, so that you can get into whatever shape you need to be, and then you can go back to other kind of consumption patterns. What we're seeing more and more readily is that people want to make sustainable lifestyle decisions based primarily out of safety, but also just out of longevity. I want to be able to consume really great tasting food that isn't punitive, that isn't something that I just have to get through for a short period of time so I can get back to eating unconsciously the food which may or may not be good for me. So from a Nando's perspective, we're really thrilled with that, because at the heart of the brand has been whole, real, natural ingredients, which you can point to. You can see that that's a real tomato, and that's a piece of spinach, and that looks like it comes from a chicken. And so, we are globally fairly, buoyant about that as an opportunity, without taking away from the short-term stresses that, restricted trading patterns are probably here for the short to medium term.
There's a lot more mechanics in being in the positions that all of you hold in 2020 versus this time last year. If you've just joined us, we're speaking about how the fast food industry came together to feed parts of South Africa. Joining us this morning on this special Red Zone presentation is Suhail Lambada, Marketing Director at KFC South Africa, Greg Solomon, CEO of McDonald South Africa, Doug Place, CMO at Nando South Africa, and Zama Hlophe, Strategy Director at Yellowwood. Speaking of strategy, I mean, we know that in the alcohol space, there's going to be a seismic shift, and kind of bringing this back to advertising now, in terms of, you know, every alcohol ad that you used to see being shot in a bar is now going to be shot in someone's house, because that's where people, you know, are allowed to now consume alcohol for the foreseeable kind of future, or at least where they feel most comfortable to do so. What are the seismic shifts in terms of communications that you as fast food brands and as food brands are going to be going out with? Because there isn't going to be a storyboard for a TVC set in a restaurant for the foreseeable future, unless I'm wrong. But in terms of, you know, what the value proposition looks like once you've deciphered what it is, does the ad become about the process in making the food? Does the ad become about, you know, how the food empowers you between Zoom calls? What does the creative actually look like? What does that final message look like?
Well, maybe as the non-marketing specialist, I maybe go first, because I want to give the marketing guys a hard time. But look, I'm of the opinion that this time will pass. We are social creatures, and the fabric of our society is built on a lot of cultural things in this country. And one of those is eating with friends, socializing with people, and creating a rainbow nation that can come together in one place. And we must just be careful that we don't let the pendulum swing. We're dealing with people here, people that are eating real food, people that want to mingle with their mates and their friends and go on a date. And that's what our restaurants provide. They provide those beautiful places. So there's no doubt that the medium will change. Right now, you know, maybe outside billboards won't be as popular as Facebook advertising for the short term, but this time will pass. McDonald's, for us, it's all about our 5-year strategy. It's all about where we want to be in 2024. And if you had to ask me where we want to be in 2024, in quarter 4 of 2019, it would be no different to where we want to be as we are in quarter 4 2020. So yes, this is a big thing for us, but where we want to be, we've got to take brave views. We've taken a long-term investment in this country, and I think things will come back. Won't come back to normal as we know it, but things will come back.
Aria, I think, I think the really interesting thing for me in that question, and I think it will apply to many industries, is figuring out what it is that people feel like they've lost. Because the really great power of what advertising is able to do is to help us kind of project ourselves into the world that we actually want and that the brand represents, and then make the choice based on that. And I think the sooner we can figure out, is it that people feel that they've lost a sense of indulgence, or is it about socializing, or is it about connection, whatever that thing that feels the most lost, if you can tap into that insight and then build your communication around that, I think that will probably be the most useful thing. So if you look at the way that alcohol brands responded, Hunters, by way of the lockdown house party, what really was about this idea of being able to socialize together. And so they gave themselves a sense of purpose in a very new and odd context actually for themselves, even when they weren't selling their product. And I think that's really what any advertiser in any industry is going to have to tap into, is what am I missing, and how can the brand represent that thing and make it more real for me in a new context?
I mean, I wonder what that looks like in a KFC context, Sahel.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, you talk of seismic shifts, and, you know, we had to, at some point, stop communicating it's finger licking good. And I know Doug has something to say about that. But yeah, look, I mean, it was imperative for us that we communicate that it's safe to come to KFC, order and eat our food. But we needed to communicate in a distinctly KFC voice. I think for me, when it comes to advertising around these times, I agree with Greg. You know, I think we will get back to those times. Maybe there'll be different times, but we will get back there. We're human beings at the end of the day, you know. And I think it's about tapping into real human insights when we develop these the communication that we do going forward. You know, I think we could follow the crowds and do the standard safety messaging. I think we're all guilty of doing that. But at the same time, I think we also need to acknowledge that people have been at home for a long time. You know, our lives have been fundamentally changed, and people are looking for. Let's call it. People are bored. People are looking for fun. People have a hankering for old times, for nostalgia, all those things. So I think for me, it's about making sure that you stick to your tone, you stick to your sort of longer term brand positioning, understand how you can make that work within the new normal, so to say. But be distinctive and really push the boundaries when it comes to the creative process. So yes, maybe we can't go out and shoot an ad, but there are different ways of making creative. And I think, as Greg said, likewise, media innovation will play a critical role. Media and consumption of media has changed fundamentally. And I think if we can really start understanding that better as marketers, I think the consumer will be better off as a result.
Doug, what's your conversation with creative directors looking like at the moment?
It's really interesting. All great creative is born of constraint and restriction. Like the real power of creativity is the way in which you navigate around that. And this is certainly no different. I mean, it's a slightly different scale, but it's certainly born out of this. And the Nando's brand, if you tell people that you work in the Nando's marketing department, they'll tell you two things: how much they love the chicken and how much they love the ads. So that's pretty good. And a lot of those, the advertising legacy behind Nando's was born of constraint. I mean, in the early days, it was constraint around, we just didn't have media budgets, so we needed ways to really be high impact. And back when being viral was a good thing, we built the slick, smart South African, really funny tone of voice, which people have come to expect from Nando's. And so that's just going to be expressed in a totally new context. I mean, to Greg's point, and actually we've got plenty of research to support this as well. One of the things that people missed the most in lockdown was restaurants, because it is a communal space. It is an outing. It's a place you can take someone on a date, a way to spoil a family. And as a substitute behavior, that's really hard to do in the at-home context. So I think advertising will respond to the immediacy of the environment for sure, but there is still the fundamental human truths that sit underneath it, which is that we are communal creatures, and we do want to find ways to be together and to participate in community at large, whether that's at work or whether that's in recreational spaces like restaurants. And so I think there'll be some short-term communications which respond to the immediacy of the environment, but I think longer term, and Mike Tyson has got my favorite definition of strategy. He says everyone has a strategy until they get punched in the face, and then you can see what your strategy really is. And man, COVID-19 has been a proper punch in the face. I mean, really. And what's been really interesting is it made us reevaluate is how good is our strategy. And if Greg's saying that he wants to be in 2020 where he was in 2019, that's indicative of a solid, well through grounded strategy. Now, how you express that strategy, whether that's advertising or whether that's product development or that's a new service model, that's likely going to change to respond to the immediacy of the environment. So sure, there might be some deviations in media spend, and there might be some changes in ways. For example, Nando's launched curbside delivery. We don't have 70% drive-through like McDonald's. We only have 40% drive-through, and we can't quickly dash out and build a few more. So we repurposed our online asset, our website and our app platforms, which have sizable install bases, to say, well, we can make a drive-to even if we can't build a drive-through. And that's sort of spread adoption from a consumer base who was ready to change the way in which they bought our products, because that fundamental need was still there. So I think there's going to be those shifts in the short term, and the role of advertising is there to be persuasive, to communicate that. So to show, and Zama said it, a degree of empathy. We understand what you're going through, and we can meet those needs in ways which are easy and frictionless and cost effective. And as those changes, adopt that. But the fundamental strategy that sits underneath it should largely stay unchanged, unless there's something broken with it, which is what a punch in the face will help you evaluate.
Arya, I think one of the things that maybe to provoke the gentleman a little bit, I think one of the things that we have to be honest with ourselves with is we seldom pay attention to the things that become issues, right? So if a year ago someone had said to you, are you the most trusted food safety brand in the industry? all three brands probably would have gone, it's not really that important. I mean, we keep up food safety, we've got standards and all of that. But to have that be a critical part of your communication set wouldn't have been something that would have been high on the agenda. There would have been other attributes to drive. And I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that there's stories that brands are going to have to tell now that we took for granted before. And that being a very important part of the choice of a food brand. So yes, we know that food safety is important, but it wouldn't have been a part of your messaging mix. You wouldn't have put up signs saying the food made here is up to code and whatever the case may be. We took it for granted. So I think that's one of the things that will be, if a diligent advertiser, a diligent communicator will pay attention to, is to go, what are the things that I'm not going to be able to take for granted going forward? What are people going to be looking for, and how do I constantly reassure them so that given any situation that looks even remotely or not like this, I actually become the default choice? And I'm not trying to critique the working together, but the ideal for any brand is not necessarily to need to collaborate, but actually to be the default, that the whole market moves to me because I'm so good at doing this anyway. And I think that that's one of the things that's worthwhile reflecting on, just to take a step back and go, how ready were each of the players to respond to a world where food safety is so important?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly the Uber Eats didn't used to arrive with 16 stickers saying that it's been prepared safely, and you can, tell the guy, shout across the parking lot and say, just drop it there, I'll pick it up. So yeah, Greg, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a brilliant point, Zama. And, sometimes when you reflect, when we wrote what this industry needed to do, it was like one of the most simple processes. It really was. And we just pulled it together within 5 days, because this, as I said in the beginning of this industry is so advanced. We cook food, for goodness sake. We know what hygiene is. We know how to do these things. We know what sanitization is. We got the best standards. And as we canvassed government, we said, government, we got it all. But maybe, do the customers know about it? Or had we been sharing it with the customers so long? So I was extremely proud of the industry. And yes, we've got 3 industry players, but this industry is much larger than us. There's many other players. But I've never been more confident than ever that this industry is a leading industry when it comes to health and safety. Possibly an opportunity on communicating, taking it for granted, because that's what we do every single day in our business. I mean, it comes with if I tie the previous little conversation into this, it comes with a massive responsibility. I also didn't quite realize until we worked it out that this industry probably consumes just north of 15% of all of beef in this country. This industry probably consumes just north of 20% of all of beef in this country. This industry of fast foods, maybe we should term it good food serve fast, because that's the trend of where we need to be in our business. This is an industry that has a responsibility, and we have to stand up and take that responsibility seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the thing that, the typical agency wants to kind of communicate, but it is very interesting to note how that kind of shifts. And I guess, it would be fascinating to know in the context of, testing with consumers, if sometimes it's an overkill as well with the consumer. Because if you've maybe go through 15 steps to get the product and sanitize 16 times to get into the restaurant, it starts to instill a little bit of fear, and weighing that out in a human perspective, because consumers are also different, is also quite challenging. So, I mean, I don't even know what is at the top of the agenda in a KFC or a Nando status meeting anymore in terms of, what the next piece of communications look like. What do you think this balance of where the food comes from versus how the food makes you feel versus the experience around the food, where do you think that mix is going to start sitting as we head into the second half of 2020?
Yeah, I'll go. I think it is an interesting position to be in. I think the one thing that I can say safely is that a consumer doesn't want to see safety messaging left, right, and center. I think I think there is definitely an overkill. I think it was the right thing to do at that point in time. And like Greg said, I mean, and Zama's quite provoking there. I think we take health and safety very, very seriously. It's at the heart and soul of our businesses, And yeah, I think COVID did shine a spotlight on it. And at that point in time, we had to really sort of reassure customers that, it's safe to come and eat at our restaurants. But I think in terms of the mix, I think, look, we're going to have to continue communicating health and safety. We're going to have to continue that. It's how you do it. I think you also don't want to walk into a restaurant that has a ton of safety messaging everywhere, because actually it's going to do the opposite. It's going to make the consumer feel like, gee, should I be worried? So I think it's striking that balance. And as things go along with COVID and the different levels, I think we'll start to see a return to normality. I think some of the insights we picked up initially from KFC China were that consumers actually didn't want to see safety messaging. They didn't want to see the sanitizer bottles and so on, because they actually were coming to our restaurants to feel normal. They just wanted to feel good about coming in, having a great meal with friends or with family, and then leaving. I think we'll see that going forward. We will definitely start easing up on the safety communication. Not to say it's not important, but I think it's more around each of our brands and making sure that we communicate in a way that's interesting and that's relevant to the new normal.
Arya, I actually think one of the most pivotal things when we do net out will become service. Because to be fair, one of the biggest things will be the fight for the wallet, right? Is one, people will have less money to spend in general, but two, the idea that I haven't been able to spend in the way that I would normally have, it will then mean that the justification for choosing your brand. And I think one of the things that all brands must really consider is, how do you make it worth someone's while to spend whatever the amount of money, whether it be the cheapest amount that they're spending with you or the biggest. And I think for me that will be the most pivotal thing, is to be able to get people in maybe to Suhail's point, in that pursuit of what might feel like normality, is to almost over reward the choice of the brand with a service experience that is dramatically improved, because those spaces will be so changed and the way that we interact with each other will be so changed, that to make it rewarding and make it worth my while will be all the more worth it.
So Zama, everyone's just come together and now they have to compete with each other again. That's how quick the pace of 2020 moves. A lot of questions coming through on the live chat from Mongezi. Luvo kind of shares the sentiment. So picking up on what Zama said, that, the wallet is now something everyone has to compete for. We started this conversation saying how the three of you are working together. And the questions now coming through are, well, what are the plans for working together, being aware that someone can't have all three meals at once? You can certainly have breakfast, lunch, and supper, but you can't do it all at once.
What are the future plans of working together? Is that your question?
Yes. Is the WhatsApp group still going? I think that's what everyone's asking.
we're trying to keep quiet. Say, see you on the street next week. No, look, I mean, I'm privileged to be on some of these platforms, and we'll always. I think we committed. This has taught us a lesson. We committed to look at common purposes, like we started off this call. We're already having some interesting conversations with Minister Patel on how we can come together as an industry. Should we look at sunflower oil together? Should we look at soya together? Should we look at chicken together? Should we look at beef together? We have this big footprint. And again, I don't want to quote a very confidential call that we were on, but once again, I was absolutely delighted to understand that this industry has local supply chain production of way over 90%. We are really, really good. So how do we uplift this country? How do we take a leadership role? And it might not be on everything, but I'm sure that COVID's taught us that we'll find a common purpose every quarter, every half a year, be it on service, be it on the next challenge, around feeding the nation, or be it about just sourcing chicken in a more responsible way. I'm sure that this relationship will continue.
So Suhail, pretty interesting sentiment there from Greg around kind of realizing that the brands are all individual. They all have their own profit and loss statement, and everyone wants theirs to be the best that there is. But certainly when it comes to kind of the industry as a whole, there's probably going to be a lot more working together as a result of this, which is quite a positive outcome, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, it's like you said, the WhatsApp group has now been established. So I think it's great that we have a platform to communicate. And I think we definitely have a responsibility as an industry to really collaborate and work on some of the big things. I think, having said that, competition is also good. Competition leads to innovation. Competition, gives us a point of reference. I mean, I can keep an eye on Doug and his milkshakes. I can keep an eye on Greg and his foldovers. And I think it gives us a point of reference. So it's healthy to be competitive, but like Greg said, I think at the right time, we should also be coming together. We are big players. We serve so many communities in South Africa, and we have a responsibility to those communities. So if we can come together, and now that the communication lines are open, I think it would be something that we would definitely look forward to as a KFC.
So, Zama, as we start to close this conversation out, you've heard from McDonald's, you've heard from KFC, you've heard from Nando's. From a very objective standpoint, what do you think are going to be the big challenges facing each of these brands amidst the global pandemic in a world that is more unpredictable than perhaps certainly that it's ever been in our lifetimes before?
Yeah, I think aside from the obvious things of making sure that your brand can get through and grow and respond, probably one of the biggest challenges is going to be the reality that this won't be the last challenge. And this is really, really the most difficult thing for anyone formulating a point of view, trying to respond, trying to get some form of stability. The truth is that this won't be the last virus. This won't be the last pandemic. This won't be the last national and global issue that all industries almost have to bow down to. And I think probably the most constructive thing, aside from maybe responding to our own minutiae in our own industries, is to really take a very clear point of view about what it is that the kind of world that we actually are trying to frame, what it is that we expect people to be able to have access to, what we want them to be able to experience as a consequence of working with our businesses and our brands. I have no doubt that it's going to fundamentally change the retail industry, everything from the manner in which you negotiate that lease with a landlord to how you formulate the food and how you manage the supply chain. And I really think that that's probably going to be the most difficult thing, is for none of us to lull ourselves into a sense of security that, okay, we survived COVID and now let's try get our transactions back up. I really think that keeping our wits about us and being able to think about how do we constantly insulate ourselves, not by pulling away from what people are doing, but better integrating with bigger systems and making sure that we're working to a common purpose, will be the most difficult challenge for any brand.
Challenge, certainly the word that rings true. As we land our sort of final three questions with Greg, Doug, and Suhail. Greg, is this the most challenging time to be the CEO of McDonald's South Africa? Should you have chosen a different period to do this job? And what are some of the sort of positives that are coming out of this in terms of really building a robust business that is perhaps truly future-proofed? Everyone was speaking about future-proofing, but now future-proofing is like a whole other story.
I guess we go to university to study engineering and marketing. We go into business to learn leadership, and we train our whole lives as leaders. And COVID is a test of leadership. I don't think we have a leader problem in this country. We have a leadership problem in this country. And it's a great time to be a leader because you can put everything to practice of what great leaders should be doing. But this is the most challenging time in my life that I've ever experienced as a leader. But thank goodness we're holding it together, because it's not just about me. It's about the great franchisees we have in our business, the great exco that I have, and the great people that we have. Look, this time will pass. Life will never be the same. What's going to happen in the next 2 years would have happened in the last decade. So man up, put your brave boots on. It's going to be a long march out of it, and just make sure we understand that cash flow is king right now. Yes, we're talking a lot about marketing and customers, but we need to understand the cash flow. We need to understand balance sheet, and we need to understand how important those attributes are to our business, and we'll get out of it.
Hale, in terms of keeping your team motivated every morning in a world that looks very different to what it did just a few days ago, certainly, I mean, are you having conversations with the advertising team around what a balance sheet is now for the first time ever?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think Greg's right. You know, you're having all these conversations. You're having conversations with, you know, supply chain. You're talking about forex risks. You know, you're talking about cash flow management. You know, agility. There's so many things that you know we all need to come together to work on. I think, you know, hindsight is a beautiful thing. You know, had we known yesterday what we know today, you know, would we have planned differently? Who knows? But you know, I think for us, you know, through this COVID, you know, situation, we've all grown, and we've really looked at innovation around key learnings and repositioning our business differently for future growth. So, you know, I think whilst there's always, I mean, I heard a quote, you know, well, never waste a good crisis, right? And I think it does put a lot of pressure, but at the same time, I think, you know, we've adapted, and we do know that we will walk away from this having learned so much in such a short period of time. And I think the silver lining for me is around ways of working. You know, I think if you look at how we have managed to do what we've done in the circumstances, I think throw more at us, and you know, we'll go through it together. And I think that for me is the power of working with people together.
And Doug, a final word from you to those longing for the days when they could cycle around the beautiful Nando's head office on the amazing bicycles and hang up the bike. And now they wake up and they've got their 2-year-old and their 7-year-old, and it's all happening. And they've got a Zoom call at 8:30. Your word to those who are longing for the past and perhaps a little bit scared about this future, because not everybody wants to rush into the eye of the storm.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's been said far better by my frenemies over here. It's okay to be scared. This is a real thing. And I think we need to acknowledge what the human experience of this is at all levels, from government through to private sector, through to the informal sector. And to be very real and empathetic to that, and not to, I suppose, be glib. And that's you know, often what disappoints me the most, particularly in the advertising part of our industry, is we can, you know, put a veneer over very real issues quite quickly. And so when you see things of, you know, we're all in this together, even though we're apart, well, yeah, we are in it together, but we're experiencing it very differently. And to be kind of glib and sentimental about something that is visceral and painful and is going to have long-reaching circumstances, I think is deeply inappropriate, frankly. So I think there has to be a very real human response to a human condition. And I think that's what I love about marketing, is it, you know, when done well, it stitches together all the other business functions. In many ways, this is a supply chain crisis. I mean, the chickens don't stop growing just because we're not selling them. So, you know, there's a whole, you know, there's a whole interconnectedness which we knew, but now we really know. And I think, you know, one of the great benefits of this is we're closer as, you know, as competitors, if you want to call it that, than we've ever been. But it's also highlighted the opportunities for us to partner with, you know, with other stakeholders like government, who it became very clear to us very early on have very little intimate knowledge of what it is we do in terms of contributing to the economy, in terms of what we do contributes to vulnerable communities, what it is that we do to create employment opportunities. And so there's a big communication opportunity which we're, you know, in the midst of being able to, you know, pull together everyone from government through to, you know, a franchise network, to say that we're going to go a lot further and a lot better together than we will if it's just a mad scramble for a wallet or a purchase decision. You know, South Africa is big enough for all of us, and it has the potential to grow now more than ever before. But it's not going to happen if, you know, it's about petty rivalries around minority interests, and that goes for everyone. And I think that's the real opportunity for us to take a learning from what was a scrambled together advert put together via a WhatsApp group over a weekend. I mean, if we can do that, we can do a whole lot more than just that. So I hope that this is the first or second chapter in a much longer book. And I will always give Sahel grief about the quality of his chicken. It wouldn't be fun or interesting otherwise. I mean, perhaps it won't happen in the public space, maybe. But it comes from a position of we all want the same thing, which is we want to grow and we want South Africa to be better. We want it to be safer, and we want it to take, as our constitution says, its rightful place in the table of nations. And that's something which I think we can build a very firm worldview around. And I hope that we can continue to do that in as messy and as scrappy and as fumbling away as is going to be the case when you do anything for the first time. So I look forward to doing that.
Well, fantastic spending time with these captains of industry this morning, and certainly quite a positive note to end it on. Perhaps everything was just a little bit overthought before, and crisis has presented the opportunity for everyone to truly come together. And after this conversation, it does feel true, because I guess the worry a lot of people could have is that it could be quite lip servicey, but it really does sound like everyone is genuinely working with each other. And some fascinating insights coming out of this morning's conversation. Our topic was how the fast food industry came together to feed parts of South Africa, but perhaps it should have been how the fast food industry, that's good food that's served fast, came together in a time of crisis. And hopefully in a year and a half from now, 2 years from now, that title will conclude with "and won," and everybody won, because there is space for everybody. So I'm glad that we're wrapping this at 10:01 this morning, because it means that you can have KFC for lunch, you can have McDonald's as an afternoon snack, and you can have Nando's for dinner, or you can switch it around, or you can have 3 people in your household, everyone doing their own thing. But certainly fantastic spending time this morning with Suhail Lombardo, Marketing Director at KFC South Africa, Greg Solomon, CEO of McDonald's South Africa, Doug Place, CMO at Nando South Africa, and keeping us in check there, Ms. Hlophe from Yellowwood, who's the strategy director there, asking the questions that I was a little bit afraid to ask myself. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you again on the first Tuesday of next month. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.